Even after investing their first-round pick in guard Grey Zabel, there are plenty of fans and analysts who believe the Seahawks haven't done enough with their offensive line and need to make one more move. Is that the case? And if it is, who should they be going after before training camp? We're going to be breaking it all down here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s tuning in, whether you are up in Vancouver, British Columbia, or down in Savannah, Georgia. Thanks for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. We're going to talk a bunch about the offensive line today. We've got edge rushers, most upside, who's got the most on the line, bold predictions, and, of course, continuing our 90-man countdown. It's going to be a really fun episode brought your way by our friends over at FanDuel. New customers can get just $5 or can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It feels like we could maybe play this headline 7 or 8 times a year on Locked On Seahawks. Have the Seahawks done enough with their offensive line? And here we are again. We get to replay that headline with 22 days until the start of training camp. Have the Seahawks done enough? Do they need to make one more move? And it feels like, at least outside of Seattle, that analysts seem to think that the Seahawks have not done enough, even though they drafted in the first round Grey Zabel, a player who's expected to be the immediate day one starter at left guard. They went out and added a swing tackle in Josh Jones. There's a lot of analysts that don't think the Seahawks have done enough, though, particularly the center and right guard positions having concern there. And so I guess we have to dive into this question because we've seen there's been plenty of activity in the NFL the last few days in terms of signings, trades. Do the Seahawks need to make one more move for this offensive line before they report on the 23rd, Rob? And if so, who are some names that would make some sense to potentially go after to try to put a cherry on top, so to speak, for this group heading into the new season?
You know, I certainly understand the argument for adding some offensive line talent. Definitely a veteran presence, I think, would make some sense. I think that, we saw that so often during the Pete Carroll era where, you would bring in a player, whether it be an offensive line or any other position, that was basically serving as almost like a coach on the field. And the Seahawks don't currently have that among their interior of their offensive line. And I do think that that's going to be a bit of a concern. Certainly, it could also be a concern at the right tackle position should Abe Lucas not have a complete return to health. So, I think that there is an argument to be made. That said, I thought that heading into the draft that the Seahawks didn't have to allocate as many resources to the offensive line as a lot of those national pundits and fans were thinking. I just have that high of expectation of new coaching staff coming in. And yet the Seahawks still wound up, of course, investing 3 draft picks. That gives them 10 drafted offensive linemen over the last 4 years, Corbin. That leads the entire NFL. And all of those 10 players are currently on the roster. Several of them are in position to be a starter this year. I think that you got to let the young kids play and develop. That if you're going to be getting a player at this point, unless you're going to make a splashy trade for a true all-pro caliber kind of a player, like a Trey Smith example, for Kansas City, for example. Again, I just think that that's not likely to happen. Otherwise, I think that you are going to try to get basically a short-term improvement at the risk of long-term development problems with your young offensive line. So I think you got to let the young kids play and then develop them that way. That said, again, there are some intriguing candidates that are available in free agency. There possibly are going to be some available via trade. And again, John Schneider has, done a nice job of keeping some cash available should they decide that they want to pursue a veteran player, whether it be in the offensive line or any other position.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn on this, Rob, because we know the issues the Seahawks have had with their offensive line. And, Yet the argument, and a lot of fans, a lot of analysts have made this argument throughout the offseason that, well, they need to completely overhaul their front line. This was one of the youngest groups in football last year, and I think that the coaching was not where it needed to be, hence why we've got a new staff that is here. And I believe in John Benton, and I believe in Rick Dennison. I believe in Clint Kubiak. I think that this staff is the right one to be able to get these young players, the ones they've drafted the last 4 years. You mentioned 10 of them. They've drafted 10 offensive linemen in the last 4 years. Nobody's drafted more. They need to develop these players. That has been the biggest issue. I like this coaching staff. So for me, it isn't that I don't think you explore. I think there may be some possibilities. I'm going to throw a couple names out here real quick, but I think you also have to consider, well, do we want to bring a veteran in and give them snaps that is going to hinder the development of somebody that could be a long-term answer for us? And so there is a risk there. There's a roll of the dice, and you have to figure out what the right move is. With that said, if Seattle is going to make another move, look, I think there's one free agent and there's one player that you could trade for, at least in my opinion, that makes the most sense. I want to talk about a player that has been a popular one for a number of analysts. I believe it was Aaron Schatz, formerly that used to have his own website, and obviously is the one that's in charge of looking at different strength ratings and stuff like that. I'm trying to remember what he pioneered. I've looked at it.
Football Outsiders at one point, certainly.
Yeah, he was on Football Outsiders, but he had, and they used to say like, DVOA. There we go, DVOA. I used to say, hey, the Seahawks are DVOA champions this year, and that was always a big deal. But Aaron Schatz was arguing for Brandon Scherff. And look, I am a huge Brandon Scherff fan. I loved him coming out of Iowa. The guy can power clean multiple houses at the same time. He's incredibly strong. He tested really well, and he still was good last year for Jacksonville. He didn't give up a sack. 17 pressures, 98.6 pass blocking efficiency rate, but he's getting to be an older player. He's had some injury issues in the past. But to me, that is the free agent that is out there that would make the most sense. Maybe you could look at somebody like a Shaq Mason, but he was awful for Houston last year. If you could get the Patriots version, then it's a really nice addition, but I don't know that that player is going to come back or anything close to that after what we saw in Houston. To me, if you're going free agency, Scherff is the only option. And there are a couple guys in the trade market that maybe could make some sense if you were able to get him without mortgaging too much in terms of draft picks.
Yeah, I think Brandon Scherff specifically, I mean, I've been a huge fan of his for an awful long time. You know, my former podcast co-host, Scott McLuhan, of course, was a general manager in Washington when the then Redskins, now Commanders, selected Brandon Scherff in the first round, and had been all kinds of criticism of that selection. I mean, oh my goodness, you're taking an interior offensive lineman that early in the draft, and here we are talking about this player as being one of the better interior offensive linemen in the NFL over the last 15 seasons or so. I mean, not that he was ever all pro, kind of a, year in, year out, but he was just a highly dependable, very rugged, tough, exactly the type of guy that I think that makes sense to bring in, again, to be that kind of veteran presence, a calming presence, just a mean, nasty son of a gun. And so, again, those kinds of players, I think, are always somebody that you should be considering. At the same time, again, I think that you risk not developing the young talent that you already have. They already are developing their own personality, allow their own leadership to kind of grow organically in that locker room rather than bring in a hired gun, so to speak. And if the Seahawks were going to explore some trade opportunities, I think that you have to kind of lean in on the experience that these coaches that we've been praising so much, the John Bentons, the Rick Dennison, the Clint Kubiaks, I think you have to lean on their experience. Certainly Mike McDonald has leaned on his experience in bringing some players from Baltimore or the University of Michigan. So maybe a Cesar Ruiz from New Orleans would be a guy that would make some sense. If the Seahawks were, again, going to kind of kick the cans a little bit, or kick the tires, so to speak, a little bit as far as exploring different trade opportunities for a young offensive lineman that does have experience in Benton's system and also offers a little bit of positional versatility, where Scherff, at least in my opinion, at this point in his career, is going to be strictly a right guard.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think, we've talked about the Ruiz relationship. The fact is he had his best season easily as an NFL player last year. And Kubiak, that system with his athleticism, it really allowed his strength to shine. And New Orleans, I don't care what any of their writers say. They're in cap hell. They've been in cap hell for 5 or 6 years. And at some point, they are going to have to try to reset things there. And Ruiz could be a player, even though he's in the prime of his career. He's only 26. He's got a massive contract. And that could be a player that they're willing to move potentially to try to clean some things up. They did add some players in free agency as well that are much cheaper at that position. And I'll also mention this. If you're looking for a veteran like a Brandon Scherf that you can get in the trade market that you might be able to get as a rental without giving up too much, Joel Bitonio is going to be 34, but is still a very good player and is a locker room guy that is respected, has not played at very many winning teams. I think that Joel Bitonio would be a guy that's at least worth kicking the tires on. But I think you and I are in agreement. You don't force this unless there is an absolutely right fit. Maybe that is Brandon Scherf. Maybe Cesar Ruiz is available. But fans should probably not be holding their breath that there's going to be some major splash, because I think that this front office has really entrusted this coaching staff to get the most out of the players that have been drafted by the Seahawks that are still on the roster. When we come back, we've got some edge rushers to talk about. Who's got the most upside heading into 2025? Who's got the most on the line? And some bold predictions. We'll get to that coming up next here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet, especially during the dog days of baseball season as teams vie for playoff positioning. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. If I think George Springer is going to hit another grand slam for the Blue Jays, it feels like he's hitting one every single day lately. I can bet on it without a hitch. Whether I'm placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet ride into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Welcome back to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to all the 12s for tuning in, and thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate your support of the show. Continuing our position-by-position review coming out of the offseason program, and it's crazy to say we've got 22 days until training camp starts for the Seahawks at the VMAC. It'll be here in the blink of an eye. We're continuing to dive into all the positions, talking about 3 essential questions here. Who's got the most on the line? Who's got the most upside? And, of course, we've got the bold predictions as well. So, Rob, we're going to be moving to the defensive line now, the edge rushing group that has a lot of experience, still has some upside there as well. You've added DeMarcus Lawrence to go with Uchenna Nwosu, and then you got Boye Mafe going to the final year of his rookie deal, Derek Hall going into year 3. So you've got a lot of known commodities on this edge rushing group, and yet there are some questions here because there's been some injuries. There's players who have gotten better, but have they ascended to where they can get a second contract? There's a lot of questions with this group, and so I think that's what makes this all the more fascinating when we look at who's got the most on the line, because I think you could make an argument for at least 3 of the names that I just mentioned. I think you could make different arguments for those guys in this group because there are a number of questions for players here.
Yeah, I'm going to just kind of focus my opportunity here to talk about players that have the most on the line on Uchenna Nwosu. This is a player, of course, that had 9.5 sacks in 2022, and the Seahawks brought him back. And he has only had 3 sacks because he's only played in 12 total games over the past 2 seasons due to a couple of different injuries, a torn pectoral, a torn quad. He's 28, but he feels like an old 28. And he certainly is a player that is a physically violent type of a player, and you worry about his body breaking down. So maybe we have seen the best of Uchenna Nwosu. However, when he is healthy, he is still a very effective player. The Seahawks, of course, have such a a good depth at the edge rusher position that I think that you can kind of mix and match and use your different edge rushers, keep them fresh, exactly the way that Mike McDonald wants to do and was very successful at doing in Baltimore, of course. And so I think that it allows the Seahawks to be able to kind of slowly bring Uchenna Nwosu back. But I still think that he has got the most on the line. I think that if he winds up being unproductive or unreliable in terms of health for a third year in a row, then his NFL career could be in doubt at this point. And so that, to me, is the very definition of the player that has the most on the line.
It'd be easy to pick Nwosu here because the injuries, and there is a lot on the line, not just for his Seahawks career, but his NFL career. But I'm going to go a different direction because Boye Mafe is going into the final year of his rookie deal. And compared to his rookie season when he was a lightly used reserve, played like 27% of the snaps on defense, he comes out and he gets almost double-digit sacks in 2023. And then this past year, that number dips down to 6.5. And he was still productive. In fact, I think he was better against the run last year than he was in his first 2 years and had more quarterback hits in the first 8 games. But he wasn't able to quite replicate the numbers he had in that second season. And now you're heading towards free agency. And we're going to have a chance to talk more about this here in the next week or so because these contracts, this is the time of year John Schneider signs extensions or tries to work on them. Boye Mafe, to me, is a really curious case because on one hand, he still is a young player. He is still in the prime of his career, and he's still kind of learning how to play the position. And so I think you look from that perspective, like we think there's still a lot left for him to achieve in terms of upside. And we think that he's a player that can really get after it. And at the same time, you're like, but has he been good enough that we're going to pay him what the market dictates, where 15, 16, 18 million per year? I mean, that's right now roughly the range that you're probably looking at on the free agent market for him to get. Has he earned that kind of money? Can you justify paying that? And so from Boye Mafe's standpoint, we always talk about having so much to prove when you're in the last year of your deal. But for this particular player, I think it absolutely is the case, because if he goes out and gets double-digit sacks and has a really good season, and Seattle has not extended him already, he is going to be extremely expensive. You could see a Frank Clark 2.0 where they have to franchise him and then potentially either move him if they can't extend him. But if he goes out and gets like 6 sacks again, Seattle might be sitting back like, well, we'll give you a short-term deal, but we haven't seen anything that suggests we want to do long-term. What's the market going to look like for him on the outside too? So there is a lot of financial there's a lot of money on the line here for Boye Mafe going into this season. As far as upside goes, I'm going to go to the other younger rusher Seattle has. And to me, it is still Derek Hall. We got to see last year what he's capable of with 8 sacks. I did feel like he wore down late in the season. We didn't see his motor running quite as hot, and it wasn't given effort. I think when it's the first time you've really played extensive snaps for a full NFL season, it catches up with you. And I think him going into year 3, he's going to be better prepared for that. He knows what to expect, but we saw him kind of tail off late in the season. So that kind of leaves me excited. What are we going to see with a full season where he knows what to expect? We got 8 sacks. We got a fumble return for a touchdown out of him. That fumble generated by Boye Mafe hitting Kirk Cousins in Atlanta. I'm really excited to see what that next step looks like, because we were saying this about Mafe last year, and to some extent he was better, but the sack numbers weren't quite there. Wasn't quite as effective as a pass rusher. Is Derek Hall going to be able to continue his ascent, or are we going to see him sink back a little bit? I just think with his athleticism, his motor, and what we saw last year, he's the guy that I think has the most upside from this group right now going into 2025.
Well, and that's one of the things I'm most excited about with this Seahawks pass rush is that I think you made a strong argument for Derek Hall, and I'm going to try to make an equally strong argument for Boye Mafe here as far as having the player with the most upside. As you mentioned, he had 6 sacks or 6.5 sacks a year ago, and of course he had 9 the year before that. And so the thought is that of course he plateaued, or obviously his production diminished. At the same time, I think that if you look into the season, in the first 3 games of the year, he started off like gangbusters. He had 3 sacks in 3 games, 1 in each game. He had 4 tackles for loss. And then he suffered a knee injury, and he was out for 2 weeks. And then over the next 9 games, the final 12 games of the season, he basically only duplicated the production he had in the first 3 games. He went up with 3 more sacks, 4 tackles for loss. So to me, I see a player that when he is healthy, that I think that he has the most upside of this pass rushing group. I just think that his burst, certainly his closing speed, is just a different level than the rest of the Seahawks pass rushers. Now, that said, it's got to translate into production. I saw the same type of electric athletic ability from Darrell Taylor. And of course, his inability to be able to play any kind of run support wound up getting him, off the roster. But there's no question in my mind, Corbin, that Boye Mafe has the most upside as far as a pass rusher. The fact that he is in the final year of his contract, as you mentioned, the fact that he's a developing player. I mean, when he first came out of Minnesota, he ran 4.51 at 260 pounds. I mean, this is an unbelievable athlete, and he used that athleticism to be a very effective pass rusher, but he wasn't very nuanced. He wasn't very crafty, but he's developed that. He had a cross chop to be able to beat the Buffalo right tackle and get Josh Allen for a sack. That was one of the better elements or examples of his developing hand technique that I saw all season long. That really got me out of my seat. Like, all right, we're seeing a young player develop. So I love the fact that you mentioned the Frank Clark kind of an idea here, because I do think that the Seahawks might have to kind of gamble on this young man's development. And just because they know full well what kind of shape he is in, and they've seen his play. But again, I think that a Boye Mafe right now at 10, 12, $14 million might feel like a bargain if he winds up having a 10, 12, or 14 sack type of a season. And that's going to just cause his contract demands to explode.
Let's get to our bold predictions real quick. I'm looking at this group as one, and this is just assuming that you can keep everybody healthy, which has been difficult to do. But I see this as a group where you might not have a guy that explodes with 10, 11, 12, 13 sacks. You might not have a player that does that. But you could have 4 players who are able to get half a dozen. And I look at this group, that's my bold prediction. I think all 4 of the players we mentioned, including DeMarcus Lawrence, you got Mafe, Nwosu, Hall, I think all 4 of those players are going to get between 6 and 9.5 sacks this year. I don't have any of them getting to double digits, but I think you're going to have 4 guys that are in that half dozen to close to double digits realm. And if Seattle can get that kind of production from all 4 of those players, this is going to be a really, really feisty defense this season.
Well, especially if you get Leonard Williams duplicating his production a year ago, then you're talking about, as a team, you're going to be in the 40s to 50s. Again, you're going to wind up being top 5, perhaps even the most explosive pass rushing group in all of the NFL. And so that, of course, is the goal. And again, that's one of the biggest reasons why I'm just so excited about this Seahawks team, and think that it's laughable that national pundits are expecting the Seahawks to wind up being a kind of a 500 kind of a club. I just don't see that, largely because of this defense, especially because of the pass rush. As far as my bold prediction, Corbin, I'm actually going to go kind of the opposite way here. When I really watched Derek Hall's sacks a year ago, and he had 8, as you mentioned, a huge jump out based on what he did as a rookie, where he had 0 sacks. I saw some coverage sacks on there where he didn't necessarily beat his blocker. He just is a very instinctive player whose motor does typically run hot, as you referenced before, and he just closes well. I mean, he locates the ball and it pursues back downfield after rushing upfield, and the quarterback is leaving the pocket. Then he turns around and he runs back and hustles to get the quarterback before they actually, are as they're trying to exhaust all of their passing opportunities and determining whether or not they're going to try and scramble. A lot of his sacks were of the 1 or 2 or 3 yard losses, whereas Boye Mafe's were more traditional. The edge rusher beats the blocker, and it's an 8 or 10 or 12 yard loss. So again, I think that you're actually, my bold prediction, like you're going to see Derek Hall's numbers of 8 sacks actually go down a little bit. I think you're going to be talking about more 5 to 6-ish. At the same time, I think that he is Seattle's best edge run defender. Not including DeMarcus Lawrence. I want to see DeMarcus Lawrence in this system before I really am going to, evaluate him. But DeMarcus Lawrence, in my opinion, is the best all-around edge rusher that the Seahawks now have. I think he's going to be a difference maker. But as far as the guys that we know how they're effective, well, I mean, very encouraged by what I saw from Garrett Hall in terms of his physicality, his grit, his ability, his willingness to hold up at the point of attack in the running game. I think that he is arguably Seattle's best all-around defensive lineman. I just think that his numbers are going to drop a little bit in terms of sack production in 2025.
When we come back, we've got our 90-man countdown, numbers 50 through 46. That's up next here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back to Locked On Seahawks Wednesday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. And for your second listen, don't forget to check out the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast. The draft is long in the rearview mirror, but roster moves and news, they never stop. Host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, 90-man countdown time. We are now approaching the midway point in our countdown. We've got numbers 50 through 46 today, and there's going to be a lot of familiar names on this list, but we're going to start with a player who honestly has been one of the more popular ones for our listeners to ask about in our mailbag segment because there is some curiosity when it comes to Nehemiah Pritchett, the second-year corner out of Auburn. Last year got in a handful of games on defense. He had his rookie gaffes. Tackling continues to be the biggest issue that he is going to have to work on if he wants to play on that side of the ball. But you can see the 4.3 speed, and you can see some of the physicality as a press cover corner that the Seahawks loved when he was coming out of Auburn. And because Reek Woolen's going into the last year of his rookie contract, and Josh Jobe is set to be a free agent, Shaquille Griffin, who the Seahawks have not officially announced his signing yet, by the way. I've been told that he is going to be joining the team, but Shaquille Griffin is going to be on a one-year deal as well. Nehemiah Pritchett is kind of that buffer. He is that insurance policy. And there were some intriguing, encouraging things going on in OTAs and minicamp that suggested that he may be ready to take a significant step forward this year, even if the opportunity to play on defense isn't there just yet.
Yeah, I'm excited about Nehemiah Pritchett's development. You can see the athletic traits as you referenced there. I just want to see him clean up the open field tackling. I just want to see him play a little bit looser. He looked at that there were times where it was almost like a deer caught in the headlights, which is understandable. Yep. But I just see a loose athlete at the perimeter that has all the traits that you're looking for. You just got to develop it. I love the fact that Seattle brought in Shaquille Griffin to be that kind of buffer, to allow Pritchett to develop at his own pace rather than forcing him onto the field too quickly. But I do think that we're talking about a player that should be able to contribute for meaningful snaps and maybe be in even the starting conversation when it comes to being a starter opposite Witherspoon and Tariq Woolen.
And going to the linebacker position, we talked a lot yesterday on the show about Drake Thomas. But, Rob, I know you and we were big fans of Drake Thomas when he was coming out of NC State. So we can sit here and gush about him for a while. And he is an undersized linebacker, but maybe not by today's standards. 15 years ago, he would have been an undersized linebacker. But in today's game, though, he is absolutely the type of size, the instincts, the athleticism that you are looking for at the position. And when you look at what he did at NC State, he not only was one of the nation's top tacklers the last couple of years for the Wolfpack, but he racked up a ton of sacks. And we know how much Mike McDonald values inside linebackers that can rush the passer. That has been a big part of his recipe. In Baltimore, he had he had Patrick Queen get a bunch of sacks, took advantage of Roquan Smith's ability there. Last year we saw with Ernest Jones and Tyrese Knight in the second half, he likes to be aggressive with his inside linebackers and send them on the blitz. And that is an area that Drake Thomas has been really rock solid dating back to college. The coverage areas where he's got to improve the most, but he has the traits and the instincts to be able to do that. And I think now, a full year removed from that significant knee injury, Thomas could be a candidate to really make a big leap this year and really establish himself as the clear-cut number 3 linebacker, the true reserve at both inside linebacker spots.
Yeah, I had some scouts with the Seahawks who basically told me during training camp last year that they said that Drake Thomas is the most instinctive linebacker on our roster. And of course, that wound up, basically being proven true. And we saw Seattle basically move on from the other couple of linebackers that they had starting ahead of him. And then of course they made the big splash move for Ernest Jones, and we saw the development of Tyrese Knight. And so that I mentioned those players because I do think that, as you just said, that Drake Thomas is going to wind up serving as number 3 behind Knight and Jones. But I just love his production, his college production and how it translates to the NFL. I mean, this was a player at NC State that, as you referenced, was very, very, very productive. And you just see the instincts, you see the awareness, you see the physicality, you see the contact balance. He's fighting off blocks. There's a lot of undersized players. He's 5'11", 228 pounds. At least that's what he came into the NFL as. And so he is undersized, but it also gives him a leverage advantage, similar to the way that Lofa Tatupu and David Hawthorne were for the Seahawks in the past. They were considered, short, stubby linebackers, but again, their instincts, their physicality, their ability to kind of get under the pads of the big guys, those big guards and centers, that's where he's really effective. And if you want to do something fun, there are those Seahawks fans out there that don't know a lot about Drake Thomas, then just look up some of his YouTube highlights at NC State, or the fact that he had 13 tackles, almost all on special teams, of course, but 13 tackles for the Seahawks last year. And we know the way that often if the guys that have starred on special teams, they get their opportunities. I think Drake Thomas is going to take full advantage of his opportunities this year. It was a bold prediction a couple of days ago when we were talking about linebackers that Drake Thomas is going to lead this team in tackles in the preseason. He's going to make this roster. I think that he makes the Seahawks better. I think he makes them more physical. I think he makes them more versatile as a pass rusher, as you mentioned before as well. So again, all things Drake Thomas, I absolutely love as far as his fit with Mike McDonald and the Seahawks.
The next 2 players that we've got here coming at 48 and 47, 2 small school prospects who were drafted by the Seahawks, Derek Young, formerly of Lenoir-Rhyne, and Mike Jarrell of Findlay University, both on the roster last year. Derek Young has not had a catch since his rookie season, but he has remained a really good special teams player. That has been his route to the roster. He's had some injuries that he's dealt with in his first few years in the league as well. But you can make an argument that he has as intriguing of athletic traits as anybody that's still on this roster at the receiver position, with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett now being gone. And maybe this is the opportunity for Young with that final year of his rookie contract in this offense where they like guys that can create after the catch. Maybe this is the offense where we can see number 83 start to stand out a little bit. And look, I've had him on the outside looking in on my last couple of roster projections, but he is truly a guy right now I feel like is a flip of a coin type instance just because of the special teams, and we don't know how he's going to fit into this offense just yet. There were some encouraging signs during the offseason practices that I got to watch that he was going to be ready to maybe finally take that step, but we'll see. And as for Mike Jarrell, the Seahawks did draft Mason Richmond out of Iowa, 4-year starter in the Big Ten. That is a major advantage in terms of competition compared to what Mike Jarrell played at Findlay University. But Richmond does not have the athletic traits that Jarrell does. Jarrell is a 92nd percentile athlete at the tackle position. And while he showed that he was a former D2 player last year with some of the plays he had when he had to start, he started 3 games, and he had significant snaps in 4 of them. Jarrell also had a lot of plays that stood out, that showcased his athletic ability and his potential, including opening up a running lane for Ken Walker in Atlanta on one of his long touchdown runs. There's a lot to still be excited about Jarrell, and I've seen some fans already kind of writing him off. I think that Mike Jarrell is a guy in this system with those athletic traits and his lateral agility. I think he's a player that John Benton is going to end up falling in love with. Does that mean he plays some down the line? Who knows? But I'm feeling much more bullish on him being on this roster than Derek Young at this stage with the position he plays and just what we got to see last year in the games that he was able to play in.
No, I 100% agree with you. And I love the fact that you referenced the off tackle play against Atlanta, where he got to the second level and made a terrific block. I mean, there's only so many offensive linemen, 6'5", 295 pounders that can move that quickly, get to the second level, be able to make that type of a block. And so, again, I think that a very good fit in this system. I think one of the arguments why you don't bring in a veteran offensive lineman is because you want to develop the young talent, like a Mike Jarrell, like a Satoa Lauamea, or whatever that has, Jalen Sandell. Again, some of these players that have shown you flashes of the athletic ability and again that contact balance that can equate to success in the NFL. But that's the biggest question about some of these small school players is can they just handle the jump up in speed and physicality? I've seen him adjust to the speed in Mike Jarrell. I want to see a little bit more of the physicality, but a year in an NFL weight room, NFL conditioning program, I think it's going to do him wonders. So I'm really excited about Mike Jarrell's upside and think that he is a player that could be a future starter in the NFL. Now, hopefully for the Seahawks, again, hopefully you have at the right tackle position a healthy Abe Lucas, because Mike Jarrell being pushed onto the start with the starters a year ago was, frankly, it was kind of criminal. I mean, it just didn't put him in a position to be successful, but the Seahawks were kind of stuck. With the injuries that they had at that position. But at the same time, I do think that this is a young talent that does have a very, very bright future. I thought that for a long time, and I still want to believe that with the wide receiver, Derek Young. And I love that you mentioned the special teams element because, again, 6'2", 220 pounds with the size and the speed that he offers. And this is a 4.4, actually, with a 1.54 10-second 10-yard split. So he's not only fast, but he's also quick. Again, that element that Derek Young possesses can be very effective on special teams. And I am encouraged by some of the signs that we saw in the minicamp and his fit in this offense. They need a big vertical receiver to go over the top. Derek Young can be that. So again, I'm very excited about both these two young players. Of course, the more pressure on Derek Young, considering that he's been in the league for another couple of years. Now it's kind of put up or shut up time. But at the same time, I do think that both of them have the traits. And as far as I've been hearing, the work ethic necessary to take advantage of those traits.
Capping off this cluster of players, and there's going to be some of our listeners. I'm just saying this because I've seen some of the responses that we have had in the chat. We do look at that. It's just during the show. It's not like we have tons of time to be able to look through those and answer questions, things like that. But Ty Okada is a player that it seems like he has kind of been wrongfully shafted by the fan base. That's my opinion. I think Ty Okada is one of those kids who comes in from the FCS level that plays special teams well. He can play both safety positions. He is extremely coachable. He's got some coach on the field type traits. He's an instinctive player, and he tested extremely well. This guy came into the league with 85th percentile athletic traits at the safety spot. Well, for an undrafted guy, that's really good. He was productive at Montana State. This is a player that Mike McDonald, unprompted a few times last year, brought up, and they moved him ahead of Jarek Reed in the second half of the season. He was getting snapped before Jarek Reed. And so I don't know that happens again this year, but Ty Okada, he is kind of in that Mike Jackson class. Maybe not to the extent where Mike Jackson was able to get in the starting lineup for a full season. I don't see Okada doing that with the talent in front of him. But Ty Okada is kind of that. He is that player that you think, well, I'm going to write him off this year, and he just doesn't go away. Ty Okada is that kind of a player, and I think that he is going to continue to be a factor on special teams. He is going to continue to be a factor competing for reserve snaps at both safety positions, and he just kind of got that pesky mentality that I think Mike McDonald just absolutely loves.
I 100% agree with you again. I think with Ty Okada, we're talking about just a very dependable player. He's going to get beat sometimes, but he trusts his eyes and he goes for it. And so I think at the safety position, sometimes you get some guys who are just so consumed with never being beaten over the top, but they play on their heels and nothing happens in front of them. They aren't able to make any plays in front of them because they're never willing just to kind of, fire out of their stance and actually go and try and make a football play. whereas Tayakata will. He is a reliable open field tackler. He's had success on special teams, as you said. The ability to play both safety spots and do it, again, reliably. Not going to be a lot of coverage mistakes from him. So I just think that he is kind of the epitome of the dependable backup. Not a guy that you want to be starting in the Super Bowl, but at the same time, is somebody that if you did get to the Super Bowl and if you did have an injury or two, he is the kind of guy that is going to be have prepared for that opportunity throughout the entire week, not just trying to, catch up on game day kind of a thing. And I think that has been one of the knocks on some of the other defensive backs, not only in Seattle, but elsewhere, is that you just didn't have that reliability, that consistency. That to me is Tayakata, whether it be on special teams or on defense. The Seahawks feel pretty comfortable. They can plug him in and he'll be effective.
As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back tomorrow, going to start diving into some of the competitions coming up in training camp. I can't believe we're almost to that point, but we're going to be 21 days away, 3 weeks away from the first training camp practice. We'll start with the right guard position, which is pretty wide open. We'll get to that on tomorrow's show. Make sure that you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Go Hawks.